Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company. Welcome and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email me, Team Mosso at the1916company.com for purchase pricing and availability questions concerning this watch. Folks, a personal favorite. Launched in late 2024 for the 2025 model year. This is a 1,200-piece stainless steel limited edition from Grand Seiko. This is the 45GS high-beat Re-Creation SLGW005. So this is a throwback to the first manual wind high-beat Grand Seiko, the 45GS. Following on a year after the landmark 44GS, it was externally almost the same watch, but internally a quantum leap forward for Japanese watchmaking. Now, this is a modern version of the high-beat movement, in fact, the very latest. We'll talk about that in a moment. But first, let's talk about the fit, finish, the sizing, because this is about as true to history as any Grand Seiko recreation or re-edition has ever been. Steel case, 38.8 millimeters in diameter, 10.7 millimeters thick, and then from lug tip to lug tip, 43.8 millimeters with a 19 millimeter spacing in between the lugs. It wears beautifully. An easy watch to wear. It's compact across the wrist and thin in profile. So on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist, I could actually say that since this is less than 44 millimeters lug to lug, even a woman could wear this. A wrist as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference would find this quite appealing. And you can see down the barrel how the lugs are nowhere near the edge of my wrist on either side. It'll easily slide underneath the cuff, even with a little bit of an outcropping to the bezel. Over the top, which always exaggerates the width of the watch, you can see that the lugs are nowhere near the edge on either side. To emphasize the elegance and slender profile of this watch, we have a thin strap that is not stitched, but rather bonded. So we have large, luxurious, rectangular, symmetrical scale gaiter. The best cut of the beast, one of the rarest cuts of the beast, and one of the most expensive, and that's exactly what we have here, but no stitching. It's bonded to calfskin on the bottom. You can see no crimping, no gouging. This is a brand new Grand Seiko factory strap, and it features a period Seiko buckle. And you can see it features a lovely little chiseled recess with polished letters. Gorgeous. Now, also important, I should say that the quality of these straps, it's a tactile thing that has to be described. You can't feel with your eyes, but I can tell you that something about Grand Seiko straps, which like the watches are Japanese made, they are buttery soft even before you break them in. It is lush and lovely. Now, we do have a case that is very similar to the 44GS. Externally, there was little to tell between the 67 44GS and the 68 45GS, which is what inspired this. You can see the polyhedron case form, the combination of curves and creases, the dramatic dip between the crest of the lug on one side and the crest of the lug on the other, and how the case drops below the bezel in between. And of course, we do have some satination here, primarily in between the lugs, but most of it is mirror finished. The Zaratsu manual finishing that takes 3 years to master as part of an apprenticeship. It's something that the folks at the Seiko Empire probably do better than anyone in the world. It's done using a machine originally called a Zalitz machine of European origin, but again, the foremost practitioners of this kind of tin plate polishing, black polishing of a case, they are the folks in Japan. It is optically flawless and mirror-like. Now, you do see black polish on Swiss watches, but generally on very small parts, screws, swan's neck regulators, and only on very expensive watches. The idea of having an entirely hand-finished case in a watch that a normal person can afford with some effort and planning, that's more of a Grand Seiko signature. You can see the vintage Grand Seiko logo on the crown. It's a push-down crown. The watch is 30 meters water-resistant, dress watch standard. We have a dramatically boxed and cambered sapphire, and it is a sapphire, but it's designed to look like a vintage plexi. Now, you can see what Patek Philippe would describe as an opaline, or a non-directional frosted finish, somewhere between silver and off-white. It does have a little bit of warmth to it. You can see the hands at center have triple facets for better contrast, and that the individual indices themselves are faceted and polished. Now, Grand Seiko dials are co-equally with Rolex the most luxuriously detailed and best made in the mainstream luxury class. But whereas Rolex gets there by relentless perfection through automation, Grand Seiko gets there through extensive use of handcraft. First, all of these parts are hand cut on tiny diamond-tipped milling tools. Then they are placed by hand, then they are caulked by hand. So this is a very handmade dial. You can see old school with the Seiko signature up at the top of the dial. I believe it was in 2016 the Grand Seiko went away from having Seiko and Grand Seiko both on the dial, but this is an historic throwback, and so that is very much appropriate. See the Grand Seiko logo at the bottom, high beat, 36,000 vibrations per hour, and the lovely little wave logo representing the 5 hertz or 10 beat per second high beat, so 36,000 vibrations per hour like a Zenith El Primero. That's why this seconds hand glides smoother than if it were 8, 6, or 5 beats per second like most other mechanical movements. Now you do have a stop seconds function, so you can set it precisely to a reference time, and I always call out movements that have very little dead angle. So there's very little movement of this crown or angular displacement before the hands move. So that's what I mean about that dead angle. There's a very tight, lag-free, slop-free connection between crown and hands. Deeply impressive. Okay. On the back is where this watch really takes strides towards the future, because we have the dual impulse escapement and the latest generation of Grand Seiko mechanical watchmaking. Now you can see a vintage Grand Seiko logo that is very subtly ghosted onto this case back. It's almost impossible to see, but you're just going to have to take my word that there is a vintage Grand Seiko lion at center. So the movement is 36,000 vibrations per hour, 2 barrels, 2 mainsprings, 80-hour power reserve. You can see it's actually a complication. There's a case back power reserve indicator. The standard chronometer adjustment is 5 positions. So Grand Seiko does 6. That is absolute adjustment. 47 pivot jewels. It's a large movement at 31 millimeters. It's a sign of a true manufacturer that makes every part of the watch, from the dials to the hands to the case to the movement. Everything is Grand Seiko. They make the shock protection. They make the lubricants used, but they can make a movement that is properly sized for a modern case. And so we have a 31 millimeter large size movement. We have a full balance bridge with a free sprung balance for shock resistance and precise adjustment. And you can see the vast majority of the adjustment will be done with the variable inertia screws on the balance. So very precise adjustment in 6 positions, but also more shock tolerant. What you can also see if you look is that these latest generation Morioka built Japanese Grand Seiko movements feature an overcoil hairspring. So the centered mass of an overcoil allows the watch to keep consistent time no matter what position it's in on your wrist or on your dresser at night. And again, we have that full balance bridge and the free sprung architecture for durability. What you can also see is we have this remarkable click, and I'll demonstrate how this works there. That click was designed to actually emulate the appearance and the motion of a bird that lives local to the Morioka studio, the Shizuku Ishii studio, where this watch is made. And that bird is called the wagtail, and it was the inspiration for this particular click, which is the mechanism that prevents the barrel from running backwards. What I can also tell you is that this watch winds better than any watch I've ever encountered. It's literally the finest I've ever experienced firsthand, and I do mean firsthand. The sound of the click, the feel of the crown, it is flat out the best I've ever seen, ever heard, ever felt. This is the new standard in that regard, and those tactile qualities are important ones. So 80 hours of power reserve. We've got the power reserve indicator right there. The finishing is attractive. Like a Jaeger-LeCoultre movement, it's a combination of mechanical and manual finish, so you will not feel shortchanged. The stripes, the beveling, solarization, and the polish, it's all price appropriate and impressive. You can even see the gold screws anchoring the edges of the balance bridge, and I'm kind of wondering if those are used to adjust end shake. It's a deeply impressive movement, gorgeous. And I would say the double impulse escapement, which I mentioned earlier, that is sort of like the Omega coaxial, a direct and indirect impulsing system that reduces the overall friction of the escapement. So that's what's meant by that. And it is a significant innovation. The watch is rated in a static test capacity, basically the way a chronometer would be tested, no worse than +5 -3 seconds per 24 hours. Remember, a chronometer is +6 -4, so this watch goes above and beyond in that regard as well. One of the best modern Grand Seikos, and one of the Grand Seiko watches I would most like to own. Reach out to Team Mosso at the 1916company.com for purchase and pricing details.